Welcome to the Panza Forum. In the Yoruba language, the word panza is usually injected into poetry to express an uncomfortable, uncensored, and inconvenient truth. The Panza Forum is candid conversations about the life of African immigrants in America as it relates to their adaptation to their new home. While some may find it easy to integrate and can balance between retaining the original African culture while accepting the culture of their new home, many continue to struggle to find a balance between both worlds.
Hello and welcome to Panza Live. This is a podcast where we discuss the lives of African immigrants and their assimilation into Western society as they raise younger generations in a country that is quite different from their own. We also explore the experiences of children of immigrants as they balance the African and Western cultures. We present to you this informative, interesting, and expansive dialogue about the intricate experiences of African immigrants in America.
Okay, welcome to Panza Live podcast. I'm your host, Kemi Serike, and today I'm having conversation with Oludara Adeeyo, a psychiatric social worker and a psychotherapist based in Los Angeles, California. Welcome to Panza Conversation. I'm so delighted to have you on this platform to share your experience about growing up in America as a child of an immigrant, I believe I'm right, and as a mental health provider to educate our community about mental health awareness. So thank you for coming here, and I would like for you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background to our audience as to where you were born, where you spent most of your childhood and adult life.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. My name is Oludara. I do go by Dara, but I recently decided over the last couple years, since 2017, that I will be going by Oludara because that's my registered name as a social worker for the state of California. And before that, I was a journalist for, about a decade. So I grew up in New Jersey. I was born in New York, but my family, we went back to Africa. We went to Nigeria, and we traveled around because my father had a job that would put him in different places in Nigeria and Europe. So we mainly stayed in Nigeria with both my parents. Their family is from Nigeria. So when I turned 5, my family decided to move to America. And while my dad still worked in Africa for a little bit, basically, we moved to Nigeria, and I've been in Nigeria ever since I was about 5 or 6 in the mid-90s. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's quite interesting. So can you remember the time, since you were 5 years old, have you gone back to Nigeria?
No, I have not gone back to Nigeria. I want to, but it just hasn't happened. It just hasn't happened. It can be quite difficult to get to Nigeria.
I know what you mean. So your dad still lives there?
No, my dad lives in New Jersey.
Okay.
My family lives in New Jersey right now.
Oh, okay. So you still come back and forth to New Jersey to see them from time to time?
Time to time, yeah. And also a lot of my family, particularly on my mom's side, they are kind of all over the globe, which is very common for Nigerians. I would say most of my family is a little bit just all over the globe now. We're not just based in Nigeria.
So did you remember some memory living in Nigeria when you were 5 years old?
Absolutely. I went to a Nigerian school. I believe it was called USLE. And then my parents transferred me to an American international school, and I was there for a little bit.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's quite interesting. So many of the conversation that I have here, because many times I have many first generation, I'll call first generation, some call it second generation like you, coming on this platform. And part of the conversation is talking about the struggle of growing up in an immigrant home.
Yeah.
And the challenges of being the first generation as a child of a Nigerian immigrant.
Yes.
I've had many of our kids, they come in, they talked about how much the pressure that they feel from the parents and the lack of the parents understanding some of their struggle.
Yes. I think I have a unique experience, but also a common experience for people who are first generation, or like I said, or second generation, but I will call it first generation, is that I'm a Black American, but I'm of Nigerian descent. Like, I know I'm of Nigerian descent. And so in my household, it's very Nigerian culture. But then, you leave your household and then it's American culture. And it can be hard because you want to live a certain way. You want to be able to just explore yourself. And sometimes your parents are stuck in the Nigerian culture of how things should be. It's very, very, very school focused. I was definitely school driven. And thankfully, school was never really a struggle for me. So thankfully, I always got good grades and whatnot, but I always had that pressure to get really good grades. But also, I didn't really understand the Black American experience because my parents didn't talk about it. Because you don't really talk about race when you're in Nigeria because it's like everybody's Black or, we're African. But in America, it's very interesting. My family made it very well known that I was Nigerian. They're like, you're not just African American, you're Nigerian American. And sometimes I feel like that distinction, which is absolutely true, I'm definitely Nigerian American and I identify as so, but it's almost as a way to build a barrier between being African American and being Nigerian, being perceived as an African American and being perceived as a Nigerian American, which ultimately is just things were created by white supremacy, this view of what Black people are like. And so oftentimes something I've noticed with my family and other Nigerian American immigrants and children of immigrants is that you begin to be like, well, why aren't Black people acting a certain way? And you try to distinct yourself from them. But in reality, in this country, in America, everyone looks at you as one. Yeah. To a degree, everyone looks at you. When it comes to skin color, you look the same. You're Black.
Yeah, that's true. And that comes from the experience whereby I'll talk a little bit as a parent myself. Okay, we don't know what it is to be Black in America. So it's part of those challenges that if you don't know something, there's no way of teaching your children.
Right.
How to maneuver that. Or the only thing you could say is that, okay, go to school, get your education, make sure you stay away from trouble. Because if you do make any mistake, it could derail the whole family. So a lot of time is much more focusing on education. Actually, I read a book last year or 2 years ago, and I did a review on my website. The title of the book is called A Particular Kind of a Black Man, whereby this young boy at his age at that time, very young, asking his Nigerian father, can you tell me what it is to be Black in America? And the father said, I don't know what it is to be Black in America.
Yeah.
But he have him reading books. He have him watching Brian Gumbo, Sidney Poitier, that this is what it is to be Black in America.
Yeah, my father, I think, tried more than my mother. He definitely had all the Black magazines in my household. He always had the Essence, Ebony, Black Enterprise, Black Barbie dolls. He always made sure he bought Black Barbie dolls. I remember one year I wanted this life-size Barbie and he didn't get it. And then he got it the next year. And I remember he told me the reason I got it a year later is because I wanted to get the Black one and they didn't have the Black one. My father, I think, definitely tried more because he, unlike my mother, came to undergrad and graduate school in the United States while my mom went to Europe. But I think they definitely did not understand. And it's like, how do I explain that I experienced something mean or rude, but I don't know what it was? And for them, it'll be like, oh, they must think you're just not smart. When really it's like, no, they're racist. They're treating me differently because I'm Black.
Yeah, a lot of times we don't even know the code of what is racist, what is not. And I've had a conversation with even some parents whereby the children comes home and say, oh, this is what is done to me in school. Instead of actually acknowledging it, they say, just ignore them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But you cannot just ignore because it continues.
Right.
It's not back in Nigeria whereby you feel like, okay, just ignore them, or I'm going to go and talk to the parents and see what we can do. So what would you say are the benefits of growing up in a Nigerian immigrant home in America?
Ooh, that's a good question. I will say the benefit is that I actually do feel, I will say I noticed this. There's a different sense of solidity or confidence in my identity as a Black person because I know exactly where my ancestors are from. I can go back to my country and I know people. I can do that. If I were to go back to Nigeria, I would know people there. I would have places to stay. I would be able to trace back my lineage, generations after generations. And that almost builds a certain sense of like confidence as a Black person in America. Whereas, if you're a descendant of enslaved people, you're lost. You might feel a little bit lost. And this is also something like friends who are Black have told me. They're like, I feel a little bit lost because I don't really know who my people are beyond my enslaved great-great-grandfather or grandmother or something like that. And that's really heartbreaking. It's really, really heartbreaking. And it angers me too. It makes me sad because it's like to be able to, even though I don't know Yoruba, and my parents are to blame for that. My dad he's always like, I know it's my fault. Because my mom spoke different languages, but she always only spoke English at home. And also when my parents were in Nigeria, something my dad told me later on, though, it was like when he was growing up in Nigeria, they weren't allowed to speak Yoruba because it wasn't the proper language. And that for me was like, wait a minute. Mm-hmm. So you guys are also experiencing some like colonization and some form of oppression within your own country, and we need to, that's almost similar to here. So it just never occurred to my parents to speak Yoruba to me at home because to them, it was like they just learned it naturally. Whereas me, I didn't because I wasn't around anyone who was speaking it. But yeah, I definitely think there's a sense of like self-assuredness when you grow up within an immigrant household as a Black person in America.
That's good. And also the food,
Yes.
So where is your mom from?
She is from, I think her family is from Abuja. No.
Oh, okay.
Ibadan. I think it's Ibadan. And then my dad's family is from Ede. Ede, I think. Yeah.
So they're both Yoruba anyway.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to chime into what you said regarding the speaking English and the language in Nigeria. Because of the colonization, Nigeria has over 200 dialects. Even within the Yoruba, there's different dialects among the Yoruba too.
Oh, wow.
If somebody I'm Yoruba myself, born in Lagos. Actually, my mother is from Ibadan. So if somebody is speaking Yoruba and I'm from Lagos, they're speaking in Ibadan tonation. Somebody from Ondo, when they're speaking Yoruba, I have a friend that they are from Ondo, they're speaking Yoruba. I don't know what they're saying.
Oh, wow.
I don't even know what they are saying, but they are also Yoruba. Then you have the Ijebus, whereby the pronunciation is completely different. So you see the diversity. And then the European came and they lumped people of different ethnic group and they put them together. Yeah. And they imposed English language. When I was growing up too, they call African language vernacular.
Yes.
And they tell you don't speak vernacular in this country. So even back in Nigeria, there's some homes that the children grew up in Nigeria, they were born in Nigeria, the parents, but they consider themselves to be elites and they don't speak their traditional language.
Oh, wow. Wow.
This is how much Europeans, colonization has psychic and the sense of our pride on who we are. To the extent when I was in school, if you don't pronounce certain things well, or your sentence is not right, whereby your grammar is incorrect, people make fun of you as a result of that. And so this is part of what many of us who are here as a parents brought from home. So I just want you to know about that background of So maybe from your generation will be the one that will re-educate.
Yeah.
And talk about the sense of pride of your language and your culture to actually teach. I mean, there's some people in Nigeria that they tend to change their accent. You think that you're talking to the Americans when you're talking to them. Because they follow the American accent because they don't want their Nigerian accent to actually show, or anywhere, any part of Africa they come from. I'm just talking about English-speaking Africa. Then you talk about the French colonized countries in Africa.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Because there are more people who speak French in Africa than the whole Europe.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, when I went to France a couple years ago, I noticed that there are a lot of Africans there. I mean, it's right there. It's very common, but wow. Yeah, it makes sense why I didn't speak it. Even when we lived in Nigeria, I began to pick it up, but it wasn't from my parents. It was from maybe family members who visited and didn't speak English. It was from some hired help, whether it was some maids or whatnot. Even when I went to the Nigerian school for a little bit, they spoke some English, but they also spoke Yoruba, and I just began to pick it up. But then quickly I went to the American International School and I didn't pick it up at all.
Yeah,
so
that's
it's definitely one thing I want to learn.
Well, it's not too late.
Yes.
It's not too late. So you already identify yourself as Nigerian American. So you have no problem in that identity in terms of understanding that you're Black, as well as you have this heritage of a Nigerian heritage that you continue to be proud of. So when you were in college, growing, how do you think your African background or the background that you grew up with affect how you navigate through the college life? I'm talking about social life in college. How do you struggle into the predominant culture?
Well, I definitely was still not in a space of like Black pride. I think I was still very much so like, I'm Nigerian American. I'm not just Black. Not really connecting to the African diaspora yet. And so I didn't join the Black Student Union. I had Black friends, but I didn't join a Black sorority or, I didn't go to the Black things that were happening on campus. And that was, I guess, I wasn't really connected to that yet. I also think undergrad college is a time you're trying to find yourself and discover yourself. Yeah. So I was focused on other things. I was very school focused. I was also very job focused. Okay. Because that is something that is very pushed in an African household, a Nigerian household. It's like you need to get a job. So you got to go to school, you got to learn, you got to, and so I was just very focused. So I interned a lot at different magazines and whatnot once I decided to be a journalism student, after I decided I wasn't going to be a doctor or lawyer. Okay, because when the reason I went to Hofstra University in Long Island, the reason I chose that school was because my parents wouldn't let me go to this. I wanted to go to LIM, which I think it's in New York. It's like a fashion marketing school. I wanted to be in fashion, and my parents were like, "That is not a real school." So I was like, fine, I'll go to Hofstra on Long Island, because at the time I was an athlete. I was a competitive cheerleader, and they have a really good cheerleading team. And I was like, well, if I'm going to have to become a doctor or lawyer, I'm going to go to a school where I can cheer and do what I want to do. So I didn't make the cheerleading. They have to bargain. Yes, exactly. They have to balance. And then so I didn't make the cheerleading team, but then I also had decided that, I was given another chance to try out again, and they were like, you'll make it. But I was just like, I don't want to do that. I want a different experience. So I went to Hofstra, and I just decided to focus on my studies. Yeah. So I was mainly focused on my studies and experiencing life being away from my household.
Would you say when you were in college, you're growing up in an African home where the sense of discipline, how you relate to adults, affect the way you interact with your professors?
Yeah, definitely. Because it's almost like the professor is the authority, like he has all the authority. You don't want to do any wrong, but quickly you learn like I'm an adult-ish, so I do have some free reign. But I remember it was hard. It was really hard because I always got good grades. Mm-hmm. And then you get into college and there's just all these extra factors. So when I was in my freshman year, I was in a chemistry class. My brain does not like science. I don't like it. Maybe if I spend more time with it, I'll like it, but it's not me. So I remember being in my chemistry class the first week and I was just like, I don't know what she's talking about. What is this professor talking about? And I called home and like my mom was like, how's school? And I was like, it's fine. But really I was miserable because I knew I was going to fail this class. And as a child of an immigrant, failing, I was like, no, I cannot fail. And I have an older brother and I was telling him and I was like, I'm miserable. I hate this class. I don't know what to do. And I know mom, dad want me to be a doctor, blah, blah, blah. And my mom was listening in. I didn't know that. Oh, wow. So when I hung up the phone, my mom called and was like, hey, like, if you don't like this, then don't do it. So I was like, yes, I hate it. I'm miserable. I need to drop it because I'm going to fail.
And that gave you a lot of relief.
Yes.
That's why I reassure you and say, it's okay for you if you don't want to do it. You know, and the reason why I asked you that question relating to professor, because in an African home, there's a lot of discipline whereby, you know, as an adult, there's certain things you don't say. Authority figure, there's certain things you don't say. So one thing that some of our children who are in college may experience is that they come from that environment whereby you don't have conversation back and forth with authority figure, and they feel like, you know, they cannot actually challenge what is being said in class because they didn't come from a home where they challenge, you know, what's being fed to them.
That's actually a good point. And as I look back, I will agree with that. I would definitely agree with that I definitely did not challenge a lot in class all my life. I definitely was just like the good student. And I think in college, I definitely was like just the good student who didn't question anything. And then sometimes that was a detriment because I wouldn't ask questions. And you need to ask questions to clarify things. But if I didn't understand it immediately, I would often try to figure it out myself. But yeah, I never had trouble looking in the eye or anything like that. I think growing up as an American as well, and I think I felt comfortable, you know, around authority, but I definitely, when it came to speaking up, I wasn't the best.
Yeah, so because, you know, that's part of what I'm trying to preach to a lot of parents in terms of having, because we grew up in a society whereby when we are growing up is whatever the adults say, you just follow. You know, it's not a matter of, you know, talking back. You could excuse yourself and say, if you have an opinion, that they actually want to listen to you. You know? Right. So before becoming a clinical social worker, you said you were a writer, editor at Cosmopolitan and managing editor at XXL. So can you briefly talk about your experience working at Cosmopolitan as an editor and what motivated you to change your career to become a mental health specialist?
Many things. You know, I went into that industry because I wanted to help other girls like me. Because when I was growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s, magazines were a thing and I wanted to work at magazines, and magazines were a way I was able to talk to people, basically, or people were able to talk to me. So I wanted that. I wanted to connect with other girls and other women. So working at Cosmo was an interesting experience. Definitely, it was very stressful, very traumatic, I will say that, because I was writing a lot. I was writing a lot of articles. I was the only Black writer, editor person there for for my whole department towards the end. I worked for the website. I started as a temporary assistant, and then I eventually became a hired-on assistant, and then I was a web editor, and then I was promoted to associate, and then I left. And I left because the website was going in a direction where the manager was definitely clearly racist, and at the time I just did not realize it because, again, when you grow up with Nigerian parents, like you don't really see things as racism until you have a real awakening. And so it became very difficult. I began experiencing things that many Black women experience in the workplace, where it's like you're given a lot of work, you're given instructions that aren't really clear, you're given demands that are way above everyone else. More is expected from you. And as a person who, you grow up to be very obedient, I was never really one to push back. And so I decided to quit because, one, I was living at home. Two, my mother was in the hospital dying at the time. I basically had a bit of perspective, and I was just like, why am I writing? Because Cosmo's a very fun, surface level publication. So I was like, why am I focusing on this, allowing this person and this job to stress me out when my mom is literally in the hospital, about to die? So I basically decided I'll just quit. And then shortly, a couple weeks later, my mom passed away on New Year's Eve. So this was in 2013. So, yeah.
So how have you been able to cope with your mom's death?
It's been hard, definitely. It's definitely been hard because our relationship was very interesting in the sense that, as I'm an adult now and I can look back and see what my mom was going through as an immigrant, and an immigrant who had a husband who wasn't in the country all the time, which that was my normal. I don't know if that's normal for other families, but it was my normal for up until I was about 10, until my dad came to live permanently in the U.S. It was all work related. It wasn't like immigration status or anything related. Both my parents are citizens. And, she was taking care of me, my older brother, and I just had all these other expectations of me, pressures from my home to be a good student, and then pressure from the outside world to kind of fit in and try to figure out how I fit in. So our relationship was complicated, and then she got sick when I was in high school. So it was she got sick with rheumatoid arthritis, and then she became disabled. She couldn't move. So it was I became her caregiver in high school and then in college as well. And when I wasn't at school, I was at home. So it was almost like I went from being a child to a caregiver. So I never got to experience my mom as a woman. Yes. But she has sisters, and a brother alive. So it's those are my auntie moms. I like to call them her sisters, my auntie moms. Yeah, it's definitely hard, being a woman, an adult, and not having my mother to ask these questions that I can finally ask, because when you're a child and you can't ask your Nigerian mom certain things, they're don't ask me that. You're the child. But now as an adult, it's okay, well, I want to have these conversations with you, but I can't.
It's very heartbroken, and I'm so sorry to hear that. And I know our spirit is right around you.
Yes.
That's what we've been saying, that she's protecting you. And it's sad that you have to go through all that. And even that's one thing with a lot of us parents as an immigrant. Even my children also talked about that too, whereby they say, you don't express yourself, you don't express your feelings. So it's for me to actually look at them and say, I might not want to put the burden of what I'm going through on you, because it might give you start thinking about the welfare of your parents, instead of actually the parents also want to focus on taking care of the child. And mind you, many of us who are immigrant parents, like you guys were born here, you don't have the accent. Many of us go through a lot of discrimination.
Yeah.
Not only regarding color of our skin. African immigrant are seen as below, as beneath.
Yeah.
So when you come home, you go through that outside, then you come home. A lot of time, we come from a society whereby the respect for the elders is very important. And somebody, that person, or somebody just talks to you as if you are beneath, of effort. Just like you said, where you're working at Cosmopolitan, whereby this person just gave you extra work. A lot of African immigrants do experience that. Like they always say, Africans, especially Nigerians, were the most educated.
Yeah.
But then we are not the most, high paid.
Yes. There's no advancement, even if all education.
You find many Nigerians who have masters and PhD. They work in all these jobs because wherever they are, they're looking at them, even because of their accent, that they don't actually belong.
Right.
And it doesn't come only from institution of oppression. It also comes from other minority who will look down at you that you are nobody.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's part of it. And being that a lot of time, I'm going to refer back to the book that I read, A Particular Kind of a Black Man. I hope you pick up the book. I recommend it for people because it makes New York Times bestseller. His father was an engineer. And after graduating college, he couldn't find a job. He was a mechanic. He sold ice cream on the street. He did so much to make it. But what he was blaming it on was because of his accent. Because he wasn't just experiencing racism, he was also experiencing this discriminated against because he's an immigrant with an accent.
Yeah, that's real. And I definitely can feel for my parents, experiencing that. When I look back, I can see that. And I think in a lot of immigrant households, as I think about other friends who are also like children of immigrants, there's emotional neglect to the child because of that. And I think it's because the parent is experiencing, which now I would identify as a mental health crisis in a sense, that they are being discriminated against. Someone's being prejudiced towards them and they don't really understand like what is going on or how to deal with it. So they may neglect the emotions of their children unknowingly. That is something I did experience growing up. As much as I loved my mom and love my dad, it's like, there's definitely some emotional neglect, which led me to feel like I have to do everything on my own, which leads to being super independent, which is not good, which is also a common thing for Black women to be like, oh, I have to be very independent. I need to rely on myself.
That is a lot. And for you to go through all that, at a very young age, it is so much of a pressure because let's assume you're back home or you are in a place whereby, there's a lot of other family members who could actually chip in and be a co-parent or also help you and lift all those things away from you and say, okay, let me take charge of this. I'm going to do this. Don't worry, you're a child because that's what they will do back home.
Right. And then, the parents come here and they don't really have community.
Yes.
I would say a lot of Nigerian immigrant parents, Nigerian immigrant families, they don't have community unless they move to an area where they built it in. So like we lived in New Jersey and we have family friends who, now I call aunt, uncle, cousins, whatever, in Staten Island. And that's like the closest to the Nigerian community that we have. New York was the closest to being interacting with anyone else who was Nigerian, but a lot of times Nigerian immigrants are very isolated with themselves. It's like they're on their own in their own community, which is why I think a lot of Nigerians move to Texas now, especially like Houston. There's so many Nigerians. When my dad and I went there a couple of years ago for my cousin's wedding, my dad was so excited to be able to get suya. He was like, I'm going to have suya every day. And because there's like a restaurant chain that offers suya, he was so excited. But, you can't find that in a lot of different places. So
that's so true. And it makes you stronger. So what actually motivates you to go into mental health?
I think I've always been interested in mental health because I could see the struggle between my parents and I when it came to communicating, and with other immigrant families and other families, I could see the trouble there was with like communication. And I think I've always just been interested in mental health. And I did go through my own mental health issues after losing my mom. And I began to see that the industry I was in was really burning me out. I was very depressed. I was tired. I wasn't in love with what I was doing. And I didn't see any mobility in that industry. And when I began to explore my options, and a lot of my friends around me were like, you can go back to school, you could go study social work. I began to explore, and I was like, well, if I have to go back to school, I have to go back to school. As a child of Nigerian parents, it's like, if I got to go back to school, I got to go back to school. Like, it's no big deal. What's another degree? Like, literally, So I began looking around, and I wanted to look for a school that didn't require me to take an exam. And I looked at USC, which is here in Los Angeles, and they have a good program. It ranks high in the country, and they are very holistic. They look at the whole package. They don't just look at test scores or grades. And I visited, and I fell in love with California and being away from the East Coast, and I knew it was going to be a good change. So I applied, and I got in, and they offered me a scholarship, and I was like, okay, I'm doing this. And as I got here, it honestly just kind of solidified everything from having to take care of my mother. And also, like, I think my mother's health issues were the result of other things, other factors, but also I think as Black women, as, immigrant women, often we neglect ourselves. And so I could see that in my mother. I saw that in my mother. And I'm not saying she's to blame for her rheumatoid arthritis, but she neglected her health. And I think that's just a common thing among Black and African women. We just work. We're focused on other things because we have to. But in the end, it can literally cost us our life. So I was also just very interested in helping Black women just feel better. And I think I was not going to go get my doctor. I was not going to become a doctor. So I was like, this is close. This is kind of close to it.
I'm pushing.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, I may get a PhD eventually. So it's like, I should have just gone to medical school, but I think this allows me to really educate and help women who look like me really be better and take care of themselves, in spite of however the world is treating us. So as soon as I got here, because I'm a woman of faith, it was just kind of like God lit up the path. It was like opportunities came. I got a job before I graduated. It's just like things have been easier than they were when I was in journalism. And I genuinely like what I'm doing. So, and
sometimes in life has to go through certain paths to prepare us for the ultimate calling.
Yes, that's exactly it. The ultimate calling. And it's apparent now to me that my ultimate calling is to be a steward, a messenger for Black women to heal themselves, to be on their own self-healing journey, their own self-care journey.
So what do you do as a psychiatric social worker? And do you also have a private practice?
No, I don't have a private practice yet. I am an associate clinical social worker for the state of California. What that basically means is that I'm obtaining my hours, and then I have to take an exam, and then I become a licensed clinical social worker. So I'm at the end of that. I am preparing for my exam. So I work as a psychiatric social worker for a government agency here, and I basically work in the public mental health sector. So I see people primarily who have severe and persistent mental illnesses, but usually is like people who have mental illnesses like schizophrenia, personality disorders, bipolar, severe depression, just really, really, really severe, where it impacts them obtaining housing, maintaining relationships, maintaining work. That is the population I mainly work with. So, and in California, that's mainly individuals who are unhoused. So that's mainly the population I work with. But with the pandemic and the increase of mental health issues, I'm also seeing people who have regular jobs but are just experiencing mental health issues because the pandemic has been very traumatic for everyone.
You don't work in a hospital base?
No, I work in a clinic. I work in a clinic. I like to describe my clinic, though, as like an emergency room, like urgent care, like mental health urgent care.
Okay.
That's the best way to describe it because we are essential. We didn't shut down when the pandemic started. I still go into the office every 3 weeks. I work from home 2 weeks, but it's a clinic. And so I do therapy, I do case management, I assist in making sure clients are connected to their psychiatrist to get their medication.
So do you also work with many people who also have drug issue?
Yes, a lot of my clients have substance issues as well. Or the population I work with, a lot of people have what we call comorbidities and dual diagnosis that include substance issue. And especially if you are unhoused, unfortunately, substance usually is involved.
Mm-hmm.
So
wow. That's what the job of a therapist entails. And knowing that, I hope later on you start having your own practice as well. Because from your background, your experience growing up in an immigrant home, I think you have a lot of impact. Because of your own experience to actually help many immigrant community to actually focus on mental health and and use your own story as a way to actually help them out and say, you know what, I went through it myself, and also educate member of our community, especially parents,
because they don't like to talk about mental health. Even my father sometimes, he's like, when he found out I was going to therapy, he's like, what's wrong with you? And it's just like working out. I need to work out my brain, my mind. And I think you're right, especially Nigerian community, we're like mental health, no mental health,
Yeah. So because back home is not something when they feel like the stigma of mental health is somebody who is actually being on the street, talking to themselves.
Yes.
So in many aspects of that, that's what they actually see as somebody suffering from mental health. So as long as you go to work, come back, you're a little bit down. No, that's not mental health. That shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, exactly. And, in my family, one of my uncles on my mother's side who we don't really talk about, he had schizophrenia. And it's something I didn't find out until much, much later because we just didn't talk about it. And I don't know, they may not be happy I'm telling you this, but I'm very much so like we need to talk about things and also be honest and be like, okay, well, he had his issues and he had I don't even know the full details because, that's just how Nigerian families are. We don't really talk about it. Until I had to ask for an assignment. I had to ask my aunts and be like, they're like, yeah, we think he had schizophrenia and he was taking medication. He was on and off and there may have been drug issues and all these things. So but even that is like, we just don't really talk about it. And it's like the person with the mental health issue is shunned. But mental health isn't just the extreme, it's the little things. It's the little things that add up and then can be extreme. It's the constantly being made fun of about your accent every day. It's someone questioning your existence just simply because you're Black. Those things add up and create trauma.
And, just like somebody could be healed physically, you could also be healed not okay mentally. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yes, exactly. There's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that, because our brain is so complex. And we have to actually be able to see when we are not okay to seek the professional.
Exactly.
And thank God we're in a country that actually have those kind of services available. So how do you think we could effectively bring mental health awareness to African immigrant community? I'm not just talking about Nigerians.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Maybe starting with the local community, maybe starting with the churches, because Nigerians are very, very religious. That would probably be the best way, starting with the local community and encouraging others to kind of get educated on what mental health is. Yeah. Maybe that's the start, to introduce it. Like, what is mental health? It's not just being crazy. It's trying to explain what it is, because a lot of communities don't know. The communities don't really know what it is. And they don't think they need to do it because they have God whether you're Muslim or Christian. Like they just feel like, I have God, I'm fine. But it's beyond that. It's beyond that.
What are some of the common stigma have you come across among, Nigerians or African or people of color in general when it comes to mental illness?
That it doesn't exist. Well, when you say stigma, well, that if you have mental health issues, that something is wrong with you. Mm-hmm. And that there's a reason you have mental health issues. I mean, obviously, yes. But like, if you have mental health issues, then you must be cast away. You must not talk about it because it means that something went wrong really bad. Well, something was really bad and that you're to blame for your mental health issues. Yes. But that's not true. That's not true. And just like you can't always control getting a stomach ache, you can't control when you're going to feel very depressed or anxious.
Thank you so much for that, because we have to bring that awareness. And actually, I'm doing a book review on a book title, I Think I'm Lying, But I'm Telling the Truth. It's written by a Nigerian who was brought here at a very young age about her own suffering with bipolar disorder. And she actually also went deep into her mother. And she felt like the reader just have to read the book and justify whether her mother is actually suffering from mental health issue. Yeah, it's kind of, let me say, the mother went through her own trauma, her own childhood trauma, and reflect back on the family, whereby even what this young lady went through may not actually, I don't know, maybe came from the parents, but also that contribute to things anyway. So in terms of our community, when we're talking about sometimes what parents actually with their own intergenerational trauma that they have not really addressed, how much impact does that has to do also with the children developing?
So much, because we don't talk. Now, do you mean just particularly with Nigerian?
Well, I would say people of color, because, your experience is a Nigerian, but you could use that as an example.
Definitely impacts, because with the parent, it impacts how they parent. And sometimes if there's not an explanation of what the trauma was, there isn't an understanding of why mom or dad is behaving a certain way. And also sometimes I think the way I see it a lot is that when it comes to parents, they can be difficult. So I'll use the example of hitting, I hit my child because I used to get hit and I turned out fine. Okay, but did you? Because now you're hitting your child and you didn't like that, but now you're passing it on. You're passing on the same traumas that you went through to your child. Now your child is going to be fearful of their parent. Now your child is going to have anxiety and PTSD in relationships because their mom or dad was hitting them. And I think what happens is that as you grow up, I'll speak for parents, is that they often forget the traumas they went through, and they often forget that it comes out in different ways in relationships. So that can definitely be passed on. Anxieties, depression, all types of things. So, and we often look at it as like culture. Oh, in our household, we just don't talk about things. We're private. But really, we have a culture of secrecy, the trauma of secrecy, because there are things that go on in our household that are not okay.
One thing that I see, and I tend to correct people of my age group, or I come across some people within our community whereby if a child or a friend's child saying they're going through something and they dismiss it and say, what do you think you're going through? Do you know what I went through back home? Do you know what this person went through back home? And I had to tell someone, I said, you were talking about your own trauma.
Yeah.
Imagine if somebody else came in when you were talking about your own trauma and tell you, what did you think you're going through? I said, we're not in competition about trauma.
No, exactly. And when that happens, that's a parent's inner child coming out, being like, oh, no one cared about me. Let me tell you what happened to me. Maybe someone else can finally care about me. And you're putting that on the child. And that's not fair for the child, because the child just comes into this world to grow, and the parent's job is to help them grow and not necessarily push on them their own traumas and their own experience. And, and what you shared, that's a really great example, because it's like in that moment, the parent is invalidating what the child is going through and basically creating that cycle again of the child thinking that, oh, I can invalidate my own experience. What I'm going through is not that big of a deal. And that can lead to ignoring yourself, not listening to your intuition, not listening to yourself, not just really pushing your needs aside because you think you don't matter, because your parent basically told you don't matter.
That's really interesting. And I've come across, being on social media, people talk about culturally sensitive therapy.
Okay, yeah.
Which is a new phenomenon that I'm seeing now. And I think maybe, I'm just throwing it out for you there, maybe when you start having your own practice.
Yeah, well, we call it cultural competency, but it also can be called cultural humility, where you have a sense of like, I am aware that there are different cultures. I'm also aware that I don't know every culture, and I am not afraid to ask questions or educate myself so I don't burden the person whose culture I'm not aware of with the job of educating me, but also not be afraid to ask this person, tell me more about your culture. So you can learn. It allows you to be open to other people's culture. I'll speak in the therapist client space. When a therapist is culturally competent or culturally humble, it means that they're able to really recognize that their client is going through something that may be cultural related, whether it's like talking to spirits, being aware that some cultures have that, or whether it's an actual mental health condition of hearing voices and hallucinations. So it's kind of being aware that, okay, there are things that go on beyond the textbook of what I'm taught as a therapist, because a lot of the things that we're taught as therapists are a result of white people. They created the mold. So it's important for therapists to really be aware that there's about cultures beyond the textbook.
Yes, which is very, very important. What you just said is so important, because somebody may say they're hearing voices. And in African spirituality, is like some other forces are talking. And then that person get diagnosed and say, oh, they might be schizophrenic or something like that.
Right, yeah. Oh, you're schizophrenic. Let's get you on medication. So in order to understand that. And that's when someone like you will be beneficial later on. Yeah, right. Push for this. And many who is going to go into this field who are also maybe children of immigrants, who could actually explore that area and see what they can come up with in terms of understanding that when you are actually treating somebody of different culture coming in front of you, there's certain things that you have to be sensitive to, because if not, it might turn them away. I remember listening to one podcast one time, this guy was talking about ACE. Is it ACE? Oh, yeah. Advanced Childhood Experiences.
Whereby it's based on European white evaluation of trauma, childhood trauma. And they're not even including what African American actually goes through within their community. Have you heard, how many times have you heard of a gunshot?
Right.
And the way a Black person will show anxiety may be different from the way a white child will show anxiety.
Right. Absolutely. And oftentimes Black children are misdiagnosed with opposition defiant disorder, when really it's a child who may be experiencing some anxieties or some dangers at home, and they're acting out because school is the place where they can escape from their trauma. But oftentimes, Black and brown children are often given diagnosis and mistreatment because of racism.
That's what it is. But, do you think it's beneficial to actually for the parents to take note of different things and to seek help at early age?
Yeah, I think so. I think it can be beneficial, and maybe that is family therapy. We're working together with the family and the child. I think it's beneficial, especially for immigrant parents, just to have a better understanding of their child, because it'll allow them to be introduced to different ways to take care of their children.
Being that you also have worked with people who self-medicate themselves, when they're suffering from mental health, can you also highlight to those who may listen to this podcast about the connection between mental illness or mental health and drug use?
Oh, yeah. Well, the connection is that, people who suffer from addiction or so forth, or mental health issues, we often forget that people have autonomy. People are allowed to do what they want to do. And there is a connection because often people are self-medicating because of trauma. People are self-medicating because they don't want to take the medication because of the side effects. So it's easier and better to get high versus having to take this medication and having to deal with the tough emotions and the tough traumas, because a lot of us live with stuff that happened to us in our childhood, because those are our formative years. So it's definitely very, very much so connected. And sometimes some medications will create mental health issues, such as meth. Meth can create people hearing voices and so forth. And sometimes the way people's brains react to certain drugs, they're just not the same. They're just not the same anymore. And they may just experience hallucinations and so forth and whatnot, and depression and mood swings because they were on drugs for so long. Yeah. Or substances, whatever the substance is.
Yeah, because there's so many, illegal drugs out there that is not being monitored. And I was talking to someone the other day. They're talking about marijuana being mixed with different kind of drugs.
Drugs, yeah, cocaine, heroin, whatever. Yeah,
they didn't even know that it was mixed, and everybody's brain.
We all have different structures. Some people are like, marijuana, I'm fine with it, but some people's brains, when they take marijuana, they react differently. And I'll share my uncle, that was his drug of choice. And that was something my family never understood. They're like, why is he so addicted to weed? And why is this such a hold on him? Well, if you use too much of anything,
you become
addicted.
Because many people have this concept about mental health medication, that the side effects and all this other stuff. But to me, sometimes when you don't know how to advocate for yourself or even speak to your psychiatrist about what are the symptoms that you see from the medication that you're taking. Because one thing I see, doctor may just dish out medication without actually talking to someone. Or you are not asking the right question. In many cases, with people of color, we don't even question doctors.
Right.
I remember I used to have a doctor that he was so funny all the time. When I see him, we talk all the time. Even when I go for my checkup and everything, he would talk to me, how you feeling, and tell him all kinds of stuff. We even talk so many other things. Then they changed him. He left the place. Then they gave me another doctor. And this doctor just looked at me as if I'm a piece of something to just examine and said, go about your business. And I said, I don't have this. Because if I ask him question, he will just give me 1 or 2 sentences. No, I need people who interact that I could feel comfortable and ask questions. And I think that is actually affecting people of African descent, whereby we don't even know how to advocate for ourselves. Is it because of the lack of knowledge or education about how to advocate for yourself?
Well, there's a couple of things. The medical system is racist, right? And also the system is hard to navigate. And sometimes you just take what you can get. But I think you are right. I definitely talk about that in my book, how it's important for Black people to advocate for their health and to not just take what comes to you. If you don't like how a doctor is responding to you, get a new one, find a new one. And it can be frustrating though, because it can be hard to find a doctor, because once you find one, you're like, oh, okay, finally. But then, doctors are humans and the medical system is just as racist. It is systemically racist from medical school. So that can be hard. But it's important, you have to do your own research, and then you have to ask the right questions. But you're right. I feel like sometimes Black people are afraid to ask just because we feel like doctors have a certain authority. And I think many generations ago, doctors were the authority. They certainly were. They were the authority when it came to health. But I think we are realizing now that doctors are practicing medical professionals. Literally, they are practicing medical professionals. So it is okay to say something, but it's hard though, because we see stories of Black women dying from not getting the right treatment because no one would listen to her. No one would listen to their pain. Mm-hmm. So it's hard, but it's very important. And I always encourage clients and people to ask, talk to the doctor about what's going on. And if the doctor is not listening, get a new one.
And then something that I see among the white community that we don't do, there's a lot of support group for different diagnoses anyway. And that's where they share information. They share different ideas of how they are dealing with their own issue, and then they move it from there. So finally, what advice would you give to Africans in the diaspora dealing with mental illness or drug addiction, or have a family member who may be diagnosed with mental illness?
I would say seek support. Support is out there, whether it's friends, whether it's a professional. You are not alone. You're not alone. Even if no one is talking about what you are particularly going through, you're not alone. I guarantee you there is someone out there who understands what you are going through, and you're not confused. You're not confused about the way you feel. Whatever you're going through, it's real, it's valid, and you deserve to get the support you need to get you to feel better.
Thank you so much for that. So, and I understand you have a book coming out next year. Mm-hmm. And it will be published by Simon and Schuster, titled Self-Care for Black Women. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So can you give our audience a sneak preview of the book?
Yeah. So it is a guide. So it's not a book that you sit down and read. It's filled with 150 practical tips for the mind, body, and soul. I broke it up into 3 parts. Each section has 50 tips that you can try when you're feeling stressed, anxious, when you just need a pick-me-up. I think to survive. So for Black people, I'll say for Black women, self-care is not just spa days and massages. It's deeper than that, because being Black and being a woman in this society is very traumatic. Every day, you're encountering someone who questions your existence. You're encountering someone who wants to make you feel less than. And so in my book, I talk about things like advocating for your health, like addressing certain issues of racism, validating your feelings, real ways that apply to Black women on how to practice self-care. So if you're anxious, depressed, pick it up. There'll be something in there that you can take action. And I think we are in a period now where Black women as a whole are putting themselves first. It's our way of fighting back against the system that has oppressed us for so long. It's taking care of ourselves, putting ourselves first.
So when is the book coming out anyway?
January 11th. So
oh, wow. I hope you come back. When you do your book signing everywhere else, maybe you could come back and we have more conversation on it. So thank you so much. So how can our listener connect with you online or seek your professional help if there's any that they need?
Well, I don't have a private practice, so I don't provide services unless you're in the Los Angeles area. But you can follow me online on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter at Oludara Adeeyo. So Oludara Adeeyo.
Oh, thank you so much. So Pansa is normalizing conversation about the importance of seeking professional therapy and counseling for members of our community when the need arises. As we publicly discuss issues within our community, we're shredding away stigma associated with uncomfortable dialogue, such as mental health and drug addiction. I really want to thank you, Oludara Adeeyo, for this wealth of knowledge you brought to our audience regarding the importance of this subject on seeking mental health care and disbanding the stigma associated with seeking mental health. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And I hope you're going to have your own private practice so that,
One day.
No, it's coming soon. Especially focusing on immigrant. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Ponza Ponza Live podcast. We hope to have you back with us in the next episode as we continue to explore the nuances of the African immigrant experience. If you'd like to connect with us, you can email us at talk@ponsaponsa.org. That is talk@pansapansa.org. And follow us on Instagram at pansa.pansaforum. Until next time, remember to spread kindness and love. Thank you and take care of yourself.